Hey y'all, welcome back to the Soulseeker devlog series. This is part 2, and last time we went over the early history of Soulseeker, including concept art, character design, level design, and even major issues. This episode shows what an indie game looks like after a year of development, with before and after progress. Soulseeker has come a long way since the beginning, and there's a lot to cover, so let's get straight into it. One of the initial major criticisms of Soulseeker was thematic, as the areas didn't feel coherent and felt far too messy. A full rework was needed, as the goal was to unify the look and feel of the world, so that the areas felt similar but also distinct and unique. The process started by pretty much stripping up all the assets and laying the groundwork for some of the new terrain. I fixed up the texture stretching on the landscape and made some new tileable material for the side and top of the terrain pieces. That also worked when stretched and put together. And using custom data primitives I learned from an in-person Unreal Engine talk, I made these platforms change color whenever I wanted. Using vertex paintings, I could create paths and patches of dirt on terrain itself without using Unreal's landscape. I also gave the trees a much needed update following this tutorial to make some gorgeous stylized trees that had just the perfect look I was initially going for. And the grass, instead of using the flat plains, I chose to model the grass myself, making the bladed grass much more believable. All this together was just perfect combination and started to make the world feel more vibrant and the effect I was initially wanting. Island 1's theme was supposed to be alien, ethereal, and otherworldly, but the original version felt barren and cold. Patchy grass, sparse-feeling leaves, and a lack of lighting made the island feel dead and cold, and not even mentioning the chest area that stuck out like a sore thumb. So it was completely removed and themed around an ethereal forest. Now the huge trees make the island feel like an ancient and ethereal forest, making it traversing through the forest felt like trekking on the forest floor as the trees towered over the landscape. The cave now sits under the mountain and looks more like a proper cave, and lit up with vibrant colors to match the rest of the island. The first island out of the three has the most freedom of exploration. Although small, there are 2 secrets and an optional area. Speaking of the optional area, it also got a big upgrade from what was basically a rock to now its own tiny island that shares a theme with the final island, which we'll get to later. What was originally supposed to be a lush green forest only felt like a spooky haunted woods, or more fairytale than what was supposed to feel more spiritual. I wanted the woods to keep the greenery theme for this island, so taking inspiration from artwork I made earlier during the year, I reused some bamboo assets and fog shader I made to create the bamboo forest. The simple switch from asset-packed trees to giant bamboo stalks worked incredibly well alongside the green fog, making the area feel both serene and confined, giving the impression of traversing through a dense forest. The layout of the level was also largely kept the same, but had small tweaks that made a huge difference. Previously, the island had 2 alternative paths, one leading to the exit, and the other one to the key. After collecting the key, the player could jump straight down to the exit. However, there were multiple issues with this design. After collecting the key, the player could go straight to the exit and leave, whereas taking the alternative route meant completely backtracking and missing many platform sections and enemies. Another issue was that straight from the top, you could float right over the exit bypassing the key. My solution was to block the initial shortcut and create a tunnel to connect it to 2 paths, so taking either path would mean much less backtracking. Honestly, this island has to be my favorite. The thick green fog with the tall bamboo gives great vibes, further enhanced by the many fireflies and the giant tanuki statue at the end. Also has this platform section with a serene waterfall that always feels relaxing to pass by, even though it's easily missed. The final island had the most drastic changes, completely changing the layout and theme, so that the final island felt like an actual test of skill. The grass and trees were prominently red to create a hostile feel, and swords stabbed in the ground and cages lit around the place. The castle theme was also kept, as that's where the boss resided, but most of the assets were unchanged for it. The old design was a single path where you could see the exit from much further away, and an enticed players to speed through it quickly and ignore the enemies. The new path upwards was more constricted and narrow, making the enemies more difficult to ignore and blocking the original path forward with walls and platforms, so that it was hard to see the rest of the island. Without the ending in sight, it would mean the players could not anticipate what was ahead and more likely to clear the enemies before proceeding along the path. Overall, all 3 islands was given some real identity, while also making them feel coherent and visually pleasing, with some much needed changes to the level design. Even with all the visual changes, the game lacked more engagement for the player. There was no reason to fight the enemies, and most of the game you could easily platform through. So the solution was to introduce level ups and upgrades to the game. Like Dark Souls and other RPG game mechanics, you gain souls by defeating enemies or find them hidden around the map as pickups. You could use your souls to upgrade at the Tanuki merchants, a newly introduced NPC you could talk to before purchasing any upgrades. Regular Tanukis were also introduced to the game alongside the merchant for simple world building and detail. Going to a merchant, you could choose a stat to level up, and when bought, the price would go up higher. However, unlike Dark Souls, it was only the cost of that stat would go up. Though with the new NPCs, this massively contradicts the law I set up in the initial plans. It was honestly just because I wanted to reuse a character that I had made for a prototype game. The level up system was added after Open Day, when seeing people struggle with the enemies and especially the boss. Although the game is not overly difficult, players would often neglect their health and mindlessly swing at enemies, forgetting to heal and just tanking the damage. I believe dodging attacks is important and a part of the game's main mechanics, but giving some help to the players who prefer to play through a small game quickly would mean they were more likely to enjoy the game. More spells were also added to the game in an attempt to increase the depth of gameplay. The heal and scythe boomerang were returning abilities from the original build, but new to the game was the explosion and movement slow. The explosion was a small charge up that led to an explosion dealing moderate damage to enemies surrounding the player. The movement slow summoned a bubble that slowed down any enemies that entered inside and was used in case of any overwhelming scenarios. Although these were nice additions to slightly vary up the gameplay, it was largely ignored and typically not needed or easily surpassed by damage upgrade. I must admit, I almost never use these abilities as well. After the open day, we were also given a chance to show off the game at South by Southwest 2023. This was big, my first gaming event, in which my game would be shown off to a much larger audience. Taking this chance, there were still other aspects of the game that needed improvement. As mentioned earlier, the new player experience was struggling. I'd given them the tools to help deal with the combat, and the levels design was streamlined, but it still wasn't enough. It seemed no matter how basic the game's mechanics are, new players will not learn unless put in an environment where they are taught the basics. The starting area of Island 1 had attempted that with a few jumps and places inaccessible unless using the main mechanics with no enemies or areas of instant death to apply pressure to a new player. But it was clear a proper tutorial was needed, as new players would still struggle in a low pressure environment. We created a tutorial world in which tutorial prompts would pop up and guide the player as they go through. The area was themed around an autumn orange field with maple leaves falling and an orange sunset sky. It was a simple world to craft, as most of the assets were already ready. However, something I've learned is that even if most players are put in a place where they're stuck and told what to do, most players will still ignore the message. Regardless, most of the tutorial was a good jumping off point for new players, so that by the time they reach the main island, they're well equipped with the knowledge on how to play the game. South by Southwest was an awesome experience. Our goal was to show off the game, have some fun, and capture any potential fans. I was also hoping to impress or convince any potential investors to fund or grant the game. Unfortunately, that was not the case, but a lot of good feedback was given, and the reception was overall quite positive. The project has come a long way, but it's clear there's still infinitely more to improve on, such as presentation, as there is no cutscenes or introduction to set the tone, and satisfying movement, as the player uses bare basics Unreal physics and cannot have the satisfying movement of something like Mario, and a lack of depth, as the enemies are simple and platformings are no more than a glorified path. At the end of 2023, development came to a quiet end. Despite it being a 3-man team, I was still taking most of the work as the animations, environment, coding, and character modeling were all done by just me. Despite the other two mainly being asset modelers, I still also had to do a lot of asset modeling. I spent a whole year working on the project, and with no job and income, I was slowly moving away from the group to my current indie studio, Suspicious Jam. And so, Soulseeker was finished. I'm not entirely satisfied with the project. Soulseeker, I imagine, needs a much more time and support to be fully realized. Despite the harsh criticisms of my own game, I still love this game deeply and I'm proud of how far it's come. I believe it is important to critique one's own work and to improve and adjust, but still allow yourself to be proud and love what you do. I'm not sure what the future holds for Soulseeker and the Little Reaper, but I'll continue to work on it and improve until I'm fully happy. That's basically the entire history of Soulseeker's development up until its closure in late 2023. I'm working on it solo now with some small help and feedback from some friends. I don't have any major plans for Soulseeker at this time, but you can expect either a Soulseeker devlog or different little things in the future. What would you like to see? More Soulseeker or inner workings of some of my other 3D or game stuff? Please comment down below what you'd like to see from me, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you already haven't. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.